you're looking for a potential fight of the night on this card, this is it. Between Marc Diakiese, the Bonecrusher, and Ataman, Rafael Fiziev. And Matt, there's a lot to be desired in this fight because with Marc Diakiese, you kind of know what you're going to get until you don't. Like, he'll switch things up. He switched up his camps a lot in recent years because he did go through a drought of 3 losses in a row. He's won his last 2, and he's looked really good against Joe Duffy, who's also on this card, and Lando Venata, who a lot of people hold in very high regard. On the flip side, Rafael Fiziev, a lot of people high on him coming into the UFC, had that one-off with Titan. He fought with Road FC. And he had really impressive finishes. And that's the big thing with him. Now, in his UFC debut, he fought Magomed Mustafayev, a guy that we don't see enough. I wish we did because his striking's insane. And he knocked him out in the first round. So then he comes out. He won his last fight over the great white, Alex White. But you can't put too much into that one. And if you look at Rafael Fiziev's overall body of work, it's one of those ones where I wouldn't put a ton of stock into it. He beats a guy who's 5-3, 7-3, 2-1, 3-5, 0-0, 6-6. So he has impressive finishes against guys that aren't to the same caliber of a Marc Diakiese. Whereas Marc Diakiese, if I can list off the losing streak, loses a split decision to Drakkar Klose. That was 3 years ago. To Dan Hooker by submission, who just fought Dustin Poirier. And to Nasrat Haqparast, who looked good until his last fight. So all things considered, Marc Diakiese took on really tough competition, lost to those guys in his last 2 trying to get his footing back, and he's looked good. Marc Diakiese on the Instagrams in the last number of months has looked absolutely bodied up, so I'll be surprised if he makes 55. I'm just kidding. But this is an interesting fight because you have 2 guys that you're going to assume are going to strike and do wild stuff, and it makes for a really fan-friendly clash. I'm glad it's this high up on the card. What do you have for me here?
Okay, Marc Diakiese is a really good example of you win or you learn. I think that's a very overused term in MMA, but I do think it really applies to him very well because in the Drakkar Klose fight, he jacked up his foot pretty early on in it, and I thought he still had at least... I thought it was a very competitive fight. Now, you can say you had it for Diakiese, you can say you had it for Klose. I had it for Diakiese, but it was a very... and pardon the term, very close fight. Dan Hooker, you're going to lose to Dan Hooker. He's just very, very good. Like you said, he fought Dustin Poirier for what was kind of a title eliminator, so that just tells you how good he is. And he only fights in wars. He's very good. Now, the Nasrat Haqparast fight, Marc Diakiese got absolutely dominated, and I was very surprised. I thought that'd be a competitive fight. I'd love to see that fight maybe matched up in the future, because although both guys have had their ups and their downs, 2 guys who I think have very high ceilings at 155, although it's probably the most stacked division in the history of ever. Diakiese, like you said, you know what's coming, but the problem is you don't know what's coming because you know what's coming. He throws anything, any type of strike that you can think of, Marc Diakiese can throw it. Spinning heel kick, spinning back fist. He has really good traditional martial arts, very fast, really explosive guy, but a part of his game that we don't really see a lot, or that at least isn't promoted as much as his striking, pretty good on the ground too. I mean, he took down Lando Venata, was able to really control him on the ground too. I know that fight I thought was going to be like fight of the year caliber stuff. It wasn't that great just because each guy kind of knew how dangerous the other was, so it resulted in a bit of a stinker. But Marc Diakiese and the Joe Duffy fight, on the other hand, he took down Joe Duffy, controlled him. On the feet, it was not even close. The speed of Marc Diakiese, especially on the feet with his hands, if you give him time to set up, and, you know, if you're not throwing those leg kicks, if you're not pushing him forward, if you're just kind of standing in the middle of the cage with him, and he's able to, you know, set up his strikes, really go from the legs all the way up to the head, you're going to have a very long night with him. Now, what Haqparast was able to do against Diakiese, and I think everyone kind of has to do it, you got to pressure him, because it's really hard to throw a spinning back kick when you're on the retreat constantly. There's, like, Yair Rodriguez and Uriah Hall can kind of do it, and that's about it. And those are 2 of the better guys in traditional martial arts and all the UFC. So, for Diakiese, he's really got to keep the fight in the center of the cage. If he goes for a takedown to mix things up, it wouldn't be the worst idea. But I really just don't see how he loses this fight. The way that we've seen him not really reinvent himself, but at least improve after that losing streak has really been monumental, to say the least. Because he kept on looking worse in his losses, too. And that's the last thing you ever want to see from a fighter. If you lose a close decision, no big deal, you can come back. Then you get submitted in a fight that it was competitive up until the submission, but still Dan Hooker was getting the better of him. And then you get completely dominated by a guy who, yes, is a big-time prospect, but still you never want to get dominated when you're supposed to be in the same category as him. And then take a long layoff, fight a guy like Joe Duffy who has all the experience. He really should have won that fight, and then completely beat him badly, and then come back against Lando Venata, a guy who stylistically you match up quite well with, beat him too and show another wrinkle in your game. I just think Marc Diakiese, is really starting to show he's getting his feet underneath him in the UFC. He had a bit of a rough road. He's come back, and I do think the sky isn't the limit, but I do think it's a guy we could see in the top at least 15 at some point, that 15 to 10 range.
It's a really exciting fight, and you look over at, the opposite side of the cage at Ataman, great nickname, and there's a lot of things that he does incredibly well. This is the trouble. Against Marc Diakiese, a guy who can kind of figure out distance pretty quick and on the fly, he's going to have a height and reach advantage over a lot of fighters. He's got a big one here. If you look at the Mustafayev fight, it's not incredibly similar, but the fact that Magomed Mustafayev on the feet is a really good fighter. I mean, look at his last fight against Brad Riddell, and I know he lost it by split, but it was still a really competitive fight. So in this one, the things that surprise me, I get it that Rafael, if you look at it, I mean, he has under 40 minutes of cage time, and, he's 8 fights in. Awesome. And, 6 of his fights have ended in the first round. Awesome. They weren't against this kind of competition. And I get it. Road FC has some good fighters. I mean, Michel Pehe ended up in the UFC. And, I mean, Josh Fabia took away and Josh Fabia took away a win from him. But if you look at this for what it's worth, I'm surprised that Marc Diakiese's only sitting around a minus 160 favorite. I think these are the juiciest odds on the card. I know over on Tapology, out of almost 400 votes, 84% going with Diakiese, and a lot of them pointing out that he's going to win by decision. And I think that he will. It has nothing to do with the Tapology votes. I think overall, there's a couple of, close fights or close in terms of the odds. Marc Diakiese, and I could eat my words because this is, you're going to see this after Wednesday, but Molly McCann and Tyler Santos, those two are absolutely wide open. I mean, that fight was, they're pretty much pick 'em odds between McCann and Santos. Again, I could be totally wrong if you're watching this after the fact, or I look like a savant. And then in this one, I just don't see how Diakiese loses. I mean, he loses the top-rate competition. I don't see him losing this one.
No, exactly. You have the Bonecrusher versus, and I'm going to catch some heat from this, the Bonecrusher versus the Can Crusher, and I'm going to go with the Bonecrusher in this one.
I agree with you, Matt. Both going with Marc Diakiese to get the win here. It's a great card. We have an extended look at our main event between Joseph Benavidez and Davison Figueiredo, the second fight. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, Matt, and as we always say, let's get into it.